George, welcome to the show. BJ and I are pumped. We were just talking before this episode a little bit about this idea of sales being, not being sleazy. And we bragged about you a little bit in the teaser there and talked about all the fun stuff that your accomplishments. But talk to us for a second. Tell us about why you're so passionate about teaching sales in general.
I think it goes back to my initial mentor. When I joined the Denman company, I connected with the senior vice president of sales who hired me there back in 1991. And one of the things that he did was, he shared with me what my role as a mentee was versus his role as a mentor. All right. And that is basically helping to become better, stronger in sales, to understand the role that a salesperson has, that it's just not about selling your stuff. And so I appreciate the fact that I spent almost 11 years being mentored underneath him. And as he got promoted, I got promoted. And eventually he went off and became senior vice president of a nice company called CoinStore, multi-billion-dollar company. And one of the things that I took back from this is that, hey, listen, he took all this time and investment to help me become a better person. And I eventually become a senior vice president of sales. There has to be a time somewhere in my life that I need to do the same thing, giving back. And I've done that with my employees, but I didn't feel like that I was finished when I retired from Graders, that I still owed the success that I have to the people that mentored me. And now I'm giving it back to the students, giving them that same opportunity to learn from somebody who's actually done it, who's succeeded, and not just somebody that's taught it.
I love that. BJ, I know you're passionate about that as well, along those same ideas, the same line about teaching and giving back.
Yeah, I love that, George, because a lot of our listeners are similar or in similar shoes as you. They worked in sales for a while. They're sales executives, and then they come on as a teaching professor or as an adjunct professor. So let's talk a little about kind of that transition that you made. So what are some of the lessons that you taught your employees that transitioned to teaching students about what sales really is? Because students come in with misconceptions. So maybe talk about what are some of those misconceptions and then how you helped your students catch a vision for what sales really is.
That's a great teaching question. And it's very common for students and even young professionals getting into the business to walk into a sales class with misconceptions shaped by stereotypes and portrayals and really limited exposure. And so I think some of the most common misconceptions that I've seen, all right, tend to be that they think that sales is just about talking and not listening. All right.
What was that? Can you say that again?
They think that sales
I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you.
Oh, that's pretty good.
I was working on that one for a minute, George,
Well, again, and it's interesting because not only did I have this same issue going into into teaching academia, but I also had the same misconceptions with my father-in-law when I married my wife, because I was a salesperson and he had huge stereotypes about what salespeople are about.
What was the stereotype? What was the stereotypes?
That salespeople are manipulative, they're pushy, that only extroverts make good salespeople, that the goal is to close at all costs, that it's all about price. And we know that it's just the opposite of that. It's about 80% listening and 20% talking. And that's one of the things that's really important for me in teaching the students. When they do their final role play, which is their final exam in my class, my expectation is they're the salespeople, but they should only talk 20% of the time. They need to be asking questions throughout the entire time to get the buyer engaged, all right, to open up and to basically close the sale themselves as opposed to the salesperson closing it. So yeah, it's interesting. My first class is tomorrow. I had an introductory class on Monday, and I have like 4 stereotypes. Jim the greedy guy, Pat the pushy guy. And I have pictures of these people that I put up on a screen. And I say, this is typical stereotypes. The typical salesperson that he's going to tell you whatever it takes. He's going to lie through his teeth to close the deal for you. All right. And quite frankly, those types of stereotypes, if they were hired in sales, they would make it. They'd be fired probably in about the first month because people can just see through that. They can see through that it's not authentic.
Yeah, I love that, George. So how do you go about helping your students see that? Because a lot of it is exposure. As you go into the industry and you work, you start to see like, oh, it's about relationships, it's about trust. But how do you help, a 19, 20-year-old who's never worked in sales see that sales is not the sleazy, slick back haired, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the sell?
One of the things that I do is I bring in guest speakers and alumni. We invite B2B or B2C professionals, medical device reps, account executives, people from graders. I've got somebody coming in next week from Stryker Medical Sales. And we had them share how they solve customer problems and build careers that are both rewarding and professional. And because I think students often believe that guest speakers more than professors when it comes to bursting stereotypes. And it's one of the things that, that I have the success is they know that I'm not academia, all right, that I'm more the real person that had actually done this. All right. And so it's easier for me to get through the students as such. We do role plays in our class where we flip the script, where we actually, we use spin and layer, where the buyer actually talks more than the seller. Yeah. All right. And that's all part of the learning experience itself. We'll have, one student be a buyer, one person be a salesperson, and the buyer's going to have hidden pain points, and the seller has to uncover those. And that's all done through using spin, the spin process to be able to uncover those needs. So it's teaching the students that it's about listening, all right, and not just talking, as simple as that.
You've had probably, I don't know, hundreds, maybe thousands of students come through your class, and it's probably hard for you to pinpoint one, but can you think of an experience or maybe a student, any stories like where somebody got it, like you taught them about Pat, you taught them about Jim, and at the end of the semester, maybe they went into sales, but they got this idea and you just saw it transform in their mind. You have any stories of anyone?
Yeah, I did. One of the exercises we had in our class, which was basically a spin role play, okay? And there was a young girl called Megan. She played the seller, all right, where her partner played the business owner, whose problem was hidden in the scenario, all right? And so instead of pitching, Megan was coached by me to only ask questions. Everything word that came out of her mouth had to be a question, all right? And so the questions like, what are the biggest challenges you're facing in your industry today? How does that affect your team's productivity? If you could fix one issue, what would it be? And these are all, situational problem implication questions. And after a few minutes, the buyer opened up and shared that the business was losing thousands of dollars due to inefficiency. And Megan listened carefully and summarized. And so at the end, she said, it sounds like the real issue isn't about cost. It's about the time your employees are losing. And if we could solve that and help you save money and stress, would that interest you? And the buyer said, of course, yes. Right. And so the first time I think Megan realized that she hadn't sold anything, that all she did was really uncover the buyer's needs. Simple as that. And that's the hope. That's why spin is such a great tool, is that it forces you to ask those questions. And in the end, you ask that needs identification question is, hey, here's what I heard. You summarize, I heard that you're losing market share, all right? And that if you don't get this market share corrected, you may lose your job, all right? And that you're losing market share because sales are down, all right? Sales are down because all the new product launches that you had last year have failed, right? Now, did I get that right? If I covered everything that, that we uncovered, all right. Now, if I come back and in 2 weeks with a solution that addresses the market share, that helps you regain that market share, all right, that's going to have a product that's thoroughly tested, all right, so we know it's going to be successful, all right, that has data-driven decisions, so it's been tested and we've got the answers. We know it's going to help grow market share, all right. If I come back with all those things to help reduce your stress and help you not get fired, all right, would you be interested in that presentation in 2 weeks? And of course, they're going to say yes. I don't want to lose my job.
With joy.
All right. And so we go through that process in terms of really getting them to say, hey, listen, I heard you. And the implicit question is really important. What happens if the market share doesn't get fixed? Well, if it doesn't get fixed, all right, it's going to continue to go on. My boss is going to be in here. It's going to be all over my back. All right. And if I don't get it fixed at some point, I may lose my job. All right. Now, you seldom hear that from a buyer, but really in reality, that's true. You can feel it in them. So, so those kind of role plays really help the students understand that it's about problem solving. That's the most important thing, is listening and not selling. All right. If they just come in to sell their stuff, maybe sometimes they get lucky. Most often they don't. And what's interesting is, when I drive to work, I have the radio on, and there's this one ad that comes on. That 97% of businesses have never read any sales books, all right? And, that if you get this free sales book from me, I'll help increase your closing your sales by 95%, and you're going to make millions of dollars doing this. And it's interesting. It's probably like 90% of the books that are sold at Barnes and Noble about sales, because it's all about overcoming objections. And it's all about closing sales. It's very seldom about understanding what the buyer's needs are. All right. If you can get that middle part done, the needs identification, if you can get that part done, you don't even have to close.
BJ has overseas group at his at Brigham Young University. What's on your shirt, BJ? I wore it the other day. The professional.
Yes. So our slogans, it says professional selling, and it says professional problem solvers.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Where can I get one of those?
I know, we need to send it. You could get George a shirt, BJ.
Yeah,
what size you wear, George?
That's
A
what we try.
large, and I'll send you a Grader's shirt.
Love it.
I'll take that. Shoot.
Yeah.
Looks like a nice golf shirt.
It is. They're Cutter Bucks. They're great shirts.
So George, I love what you've mentioned, a couple ways to help get over that stereotype. And I'm with you 100%. Guest speakers are key, I think, in those intro classes, especially the role plays, because you can tell students the importance of listening, but it's not until they do it that they realize, like, I was thinking about my next question, I wasn't listening, and I don't know where to take the conversation, right? And so that role playing, I love it. It's beautiful. So let's maybe just shift gears for a minute and talk about your experience in going from as a practitioner to academics, because that's a difficult transition for a lot of people, because you have all of these years of experience and then you have to find a way to put it into a curriculum in one semester. So can you talk a little about some of the challenges you had, and how you overcame them, some of the things you wish you had done differently, and some of the things that you've learned work well?
Yeah. I think I'm still overcoming them. I mean,
we all are. Anyone who teaches tells us every semester.
It's interesting, because when I first started, I taught 315, which is professional sales. I had that one class, and then it grew to, I went to 291, which principles of marketing, and then I did both, and then I ended up picking up 495, which is a capstone, which you're solving a problem for a client, and the client's paying for that solution, whether it's a new product or it's an advertising campaign, whatever. And I've worked with, for example, on our sales 315 class, I would say 90% of the professors at Miami I brought in. I actually recruited them, and we've expanded the team to include executive visiting professors like myself, and from all over the place. I mean, in fact, a gentleman that I brought in, JT Hart, was a senior vice president of merchandising for Kroger, and he owns his own company right now. He sells companies, and he started yesterday for the first day. And so I told him that that it's going to be a difficult transition for a while, but it's easier in the sales class because our peers are people like myself. But when I teach the 495 capstone, my peers are academia. They're all tenured professors, right? And there's friction there, right? Because, their approach sometimes is different than mine. All right. And I've had to learn to adapt and so forth. So just a couple of things. In corporate sales, as you probably know, success is basically measured in numbers, revenue, margin, accounts closed, whatever it may be. Where in academia, success is measured by how well the students are grasping ideas, whether they're asking better questions, and whether they're developing the skill sets. One of the things that I've learned is that my role as a professor is to get these students ready for the real world. That's the overarching objective on any class, any professor that teaches at Miami, is to get these students ready for the real world. And so when you do role plays that are actually real examples of issues that I've gone through in my personal life, all right, the students, they understand that, hey, this is real. This is not a case study from a book, all right? And so one of the things that I've learned is that you can't close the deal with the students. You have to coach them until they close it themselves. And that's probably the biggest learning that I've had in my 3 years teaching. The other thing is dealing with speed versus patience, all right? In the corporate sales, it's fast-paced, daily calls, weekly pipeline reports, quarterly quotas, yada, yada, yada. In teaching, the payoff comes a lot slower. You may not even see the result of your work until weeks, months, or years later.
How did you first handle that one, though? Like your first semester teaching, when you're used to that instant payoff, but then you're not seeing it. Did you feel like I'm not doing something right, or
no? Because I actually had a student that came to me and said that she had an opportunity to interview for Procter & Gamble.
Oh,
and she wasn't really sure whether it was the right thing. And I told her, my God, definitely take that interview, because Procter & Gamble is one of the best coaching companies out there. I mean, it's like, it's hitting the lottery in terms of the experience, and you're going to be able to, place yourself anywhere you want if you succeed in Procter & Gamble. And she was one of my best salespersons. All right. So that helped me a lot. And then I had another person that basically, I had the students fill out questionnaire and like, what kind of sales experience do you have? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? What marketing classes have you taken? And I'm trying to get an idea of where they think they're going to see themselves in 4 or 5 years. And more often than not, I would say probably 80% of the students that are in sales, they're not even thinking about going into sales.
yeah.
They're about going into accounting, or they're going into finance, or they're going into, logistics and so forth. And I do a temperature check about midway through the course to see if anything's changed. And then we do that at the end of the semester. And it's amazing how many of those people have converted into, like, you know what, maybe this is something I can do. I'm actually pretty good at this.
Yeah.
All right. I got an A on my role play, and I didn't realize that, that, hey, I can actually do this, which means I've changed the stereotypes, that they've been able to learn, the skill sets, and realize that maybe they're, that they actually can think more. And so when I get that student saying, thanks to you, I'm now looking for a career in sales. Those are the things. It's like that golf shot. You got 19 bad golf shots, and then you have this one drive. It's right down the middle. All right. About the time you want to throw your clubs in the water, that one shot comes. All right. And it keeps you wanting to come back and punish yourself anymore.
See, that's the annoying thing with golf. You sound like me when I was out a few weeks ago.
That's the win. All right. When you've got a student, that you've mentored them into sales.
Yeah. We have just a few more minutes before we wrap up. I wanted to get just one last piece, and then regarding, as you're talking about this transition, one area that BJ and I, we just did a podcast on this the other day, was on the curriculum. And before we started, you started sharing that. How did you, like, first-time professors, she's listening to this and she's thinking, I know industry stuff, but now I got to translate that into a 13, 15-week semester. How did you go about doing that? And what was the hardest part for you? And then we'll do one more question after that and wrap up.
Yeah, I got very lucky. From my sense is that I actually had a professor that was teaching this class that basically said, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Take my course information, all right, read through it, and adapt it as you can apply it to yourself. All right. And so thank God I had that I didn't have to create the slides. I didn't have to create the test questions. I didn't have to create the role plays. But I would tell you that by the time I got about 4 or 5 weeks into the class, I was there making my changes. I was feeling comfortable. I got started and I realized, hey, listen, there was stuff that I was reading about that I didn't know the name of it, but I was doing it. All right. Like LAIR. I didn't know what LAIR stood for, but I did it in real life because it's just the way I was taught to be able to overcome objections. Same thing with spin. Spin was something that, again, I'd never studied spin before, but once I read it in the book, and then I went out and bought the book Spin Selling by Vern, I think Harnish. Well, no, that's I forget who wrote Spin Selling, but I've read that book about 5 times, and I pick it up probably once a semester just to read through it again, because it's such a great book, and it helped me. That was probably the biggest change I gave my class, was to include spin. All right, the professors were using more of LAIR beforehand, to basically identify buyers' needs, and it doesn't work as well as spin does. When you put both together, it gives you a very powerful tool. And so I was the first professor in Miami to really incorporate spin, and I've actually gone to a number of the business professors and given them the book, and suggested that they actually read it and incorporate it in their class, because it does work. Simple as that.
I think that's super powerful, George. I think for anyone who's teaching sales for the first time, especially coming from the corporate world, is you have all this knowledge and you think, no, I can do it myself. I can just create. I can teach this, and that's just so hard to do. So try not to reinvent the wheel, and then just kind of adjust as you go to learn what you like, I think is a really important takeaway.
And the course changes every semester. I mean, I've taught it now for like 6 or 8 semesters, and the core is still the same, but the role play model questions, the test questions have changed, and I've started incorporating spin sooner than later. So,
love it. As we get ready to wrap up here, George, if there's one major piece of advice you'd give to a professor, she or he starting off teaching, what's that one major piece of advice?
think to really understand what the end goal is. And that end goal is to get these students prepared for the real life. All right. It's not about working with a client and closing the deal for the client, and also realizing that you're not going to close a deal with these students. They have to close it themselves. All right. They're the ones that have to come back to you and show that they've learned the stuff. So I think that if you keep in mind that it's your experiences, your successes, your failures are all tools that you can use to help the students learn for real life. But in the end, they have to be able to close the deal themselves. To succeed in world, and your job is to get them ready, all right, so that they're that much closer to being successful. You know what's interesting? The students when they have their job interviews and they talk about the first question is, what experience do you have in sales? And I don't have any. I've been in school for 4 years. And I tell them that's you're crazy.
Yeah.
You just spent the last 4 years, all right, learning about sales, learning about accounting, learning about supply chain. You've got a tremendous amount of learning background behind you, and the role plays, the case studies, the capstones that you've taken. These are real world problem solutions that you've been able to put them on your resume, talk about it. And you've got 4 years of experience that you need to share with those. But go back and make sure that you've got the notes, and the recommendations from professors like myself, all right, that have been successful in the real life, and have found these students to be ready to go out in the real world. And that's usually the first thing when somebody asks me for a recommendation from an employer. I'll start off by saying, this student is ready.
Let's go.
Right? They've succeeded in college and they're ready for the real world. You're getting a gemstone. Please take advantage of her skill sets or his skill sets.
Well, George, listen, we're pumped and we're excited. We thank you so much for taking the time to come on a show today. I think you helped us to answer a lot of questions.
Thank you.
If folks want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do so?
They can reach out for me at my Miami email address. It's denmangj@miamioh.edu.
All right, we'll put that in the show notes. BJ, any closing thoughts?
George, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It's going to help a lot of new professors who are trying to figure out what to do.
Well, thank you, BJ.
Appreciate it. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Donald. Been a pleasure.